Hello everyone and welcome to Geotab Online Training. Thanks for joining us today for Tuesday's talk. This is Carrie Carter and today we're going to talk about some IFTA basics. We want to try and give you an overview of what IFTA truly is, because everybody has a different variation on a theme, and really give you some understanding as to what it is and where it's coming from, where it's going to, and what we're trying to accomplish with it. Today I have with me James McCudden and Eric Rutten. James is in our Solutions Engineering team and Eric is with our Tech Services Department. So between the two of them, they are the SMEs on the subject, and they are going to introduce us and kind of walk us through. And with that, James, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. So, as mentioned, today we're going to cover IFTA Basics. Carrie has covered our introduction, so as mentioned, Eric is the technical services specialist, I'm a solutions specialist, and Stephanie's going to be available to help from a high-level perspective as well. What we're going to discuss today for IFTA Basics is really at a initial level, what is IFTA, who does it apply to, who might use the IFTA report that's available within Geotab. We're also going to discuss how to use IFTA reports. We're going to give you some tips to ensure data accuracy, to make sure you get good data for your IFTA reporting. We're going to look at a few options that are available in the IFTA marketplace for alternate solutions, and also look at the future of IFTA for both Geotab and the IFTA reporting direction.
So to begin with, let's look at what is IFTA, just some basics of the International Fuel Tax Agreement. In general, IFTA is an agreement between the 48 contiguous states of the U.S., just meaning all the ones that are together, so not Hawaii, not Alaska, and then also the Canadian provinces. The purpose of this was to enact some kind of uniform administration to monitor fuel taxation and distribute taxes among the states for those vehicles which are qualified for interjurisdictional travel. Some of the core principles for IFTA, which are behind the IFTA agreement, are, first of all, the base jurisdiction. So what is the base jurisdiction? That's where the vehicles are registered and where at least some travel is accumulated. So in order to be designated as that those need to be satisfied, those conditions there. And furthermore, the purpose of IFTA, or a principle of IFTA, is the retention by the base jurisdiction of sovereign authority to determine the tax rates, exemptions as they see fit. So they still have the power to do that, and also the point of IFTA is to establish one definition for what a qualified motor vehicle is. So let's look at just what that might be. And that is motor vehicle used, designed, and maintained for the transportation of persons or property. But not all vehicles, they have to be over a size of 26,000 pounds or 11,797 kilograms. So later on when we're going to talk about the ELD mandate applying to so many vehicles, like 3 million vehicles I think it is. Not all of these will be IFTA vehicles, but a huge number of them will be. Okay. Furthermore, 3 axles also, regardless of weight. So it doesn't have to be 26,000 pounds or 11,000 kilograms, but if it's got 3 axles, it's an IFTA vehicle, or qualified to be at least, if it's traveling between states. Okay. Next, just to go over a little bit about audits, just so we kind of understand if an audit's coming our way. The base jurisdiction itself is the one who conducts the audit for itself and all member jurisdictions, and they have some rules governing how much they got to audit, etc. So each jurisdiction must complete audits on an average of 3% of its licensees per year. 25% of these must involve high-distance accounts, and 15% of these must involve low-distance accounts. So overall, 3% is low, but...
Eric, I have a quick question here for you. What do you consider to be a jurisdiction? Is that per state? Is that per county? How does that work? Is that when you're saying, you're giving numbers here that say the jurisdiction must have 3 to 25% of the audits in a high distance? Can you just clarify that?
Sure, great question. It would refer to the state. Okay, and just a brief little part on IRP, because they are similar in ways, though my Geotab doesn't specifically have an IRP report, in some ways it can be used as an IRP report. So just to go kind of quickly over what is IRP, it's an agreement similar to IFTA among the contiguous states and DC, and the District of Columbia, which is actually excluded from IFTA. So good to know. It's actually an IRP. It's for not fuel taxation tracking, but for distance tracking. So that's why you could use our IFTA report, which does track distance traveled in states, and we do actually still track distance traveled in District of Columbia. So you could actually use it for that. And just a blurb there, just the IRP's principle is to basically similar to IFTA, to promote kind of unity among the states and to encourage use of the highway system. So to make it easy to track and monitor, they have implemented this international registration plan.
Okay, a little bit on the history of IFTA and the use of GPS data. Like every industry, every organization, as technology improves, there are opportunities to leverage this information to make operations more efficient. And so IFTA would be no exception to the rule, and moving from relying on paper logs into using the GPS data that is embedded within truck fleets, depending on what numbers you hear, anywhere from a third to two-thirds of trucks and fleets would have a GPS device in it to be able to provide GPS data and location-based information, which is the purpose, obviously, of IFTA. So as the prevalence of GPS expands, part of the learning curve is understanding how GPS works, how paper logs were used, and to manage the transition from one to the other. Trips themselves could be calculated either only by GPS data, by reconciling GPS data to the odometer, or by paper miles. Each one has sort of benefits and possible error, and some are considered a little bit more accurate than others, and we'll talk in a bit more detail. Just another piece that IFTA is dealing with as technology changes is how to handle alternate fuels, and specifically to standardize conversion rates within the various different jurisdictions. And then one other important one is the FMCSA's ELD mandate, which, as Eric indicated, could affect as many as 3 million different vehicles. The use of a standardized system to accommodate all of the various rules and regulations within a trucking fleet, which could include IRP, including IFTA, including HOS, including DVIR. So part of one of the fleet's challenges is to select a solution that would possibly satisfy all of those within one umbrella. Within the IFTA compliance specific to the electronic data, there are specific requirements spelled out in the IFTA manual, which I have a link to here. I won't get into the specific detail for it, but there is dozens of line-by-line rows which mandate how the GPS device should, or what is needed to be recorded and sent and transmitted. So this information is available there, and Geotab has worked to make sure that all of those elements are covered off. An electronic data recording system summary, which is basically a matrix to show that each element is covered off, and we can make that available as well. And then one of the other important pieces, without getting too detailed into what's required and how they're covered, an important piece is that IFTA does require that you keep your data for 4+ years, so kind of 4 years plus the current, so you're really into 5 years. Now, important piece within the Geotab world is that Geotab only guarantees that we will keep data for 1 year. We're starting to have to remove data older than that for a number of reasons, and I've highlighted this blog here which explains a little bit for why that retention period is needed within Geotab, and how you as a reseller, your customer, do a backup, which is a core function within the MyGeotab software. It's really as easy as a couple of clicks to go in and to do a backup. So I would encourage you to look at that blog to see how you're going to be able to keep your data, and it's really important that you do make sure to do that, as to be compliant with IFTA, you do need to have that backup of 4+ years. IFTA organization themselves, as the technology changes, my sense is that they realize they don't want to be involved in specifying how the providers should provide the data, not saying how many pings you need and really getting into the fine detail of technical, but rather making sure that the data that's provided does achieve its objective, which is to give you mileage within the state accurately. So what this slide here is just a history of a ballot in 2014 that has been approved and will change what is required technically as of January 1st, 2017. What the change in 2017 is in part, again, we highlighted IRP and how close IRP is to IFTA, and the IRP organization changed their technical requirements a little bit, and it makes sense, I think, for IFTA and IRP to be very similar, because they do, at their core, require the same base data. So trying to keep the two pretty much in sync, I think, is one of their goals. The language of the change illustrates an accommodation for the use of GPS logs and isn't as specific for how, but really consistency is the message through that change. And then at a little bit more detail, all of the P600 series of electronic requirements which are in that document were removed and are replaced by P540 series, which has, again, more basic general requirements and not a line-by-line specific manner in which records should be kept.
Okay, so just to go over some benefits of using MyGeotab's IFTA report, to use a telematic system to file your IFTA taxes. So first of all, filing your IFTA taxes manually opens the door to many potential issues that I'm sure everyone is aware already. Missing paperwork, manual entry errors, late filings, etc. Many different things. What telematics does, however, is does away with all of this stuff, because location history, odometer history is all tracked automatically and is actually reported more accurately than it would have been when reported manually, because then you're relying on what the driver, as he crosses the state line to, write down his odometer value, and if he forgot, what's he going to do? Like he's already driven 10 miles down the road, so he's going to guess, So anyway, we do away with all of this. It's an automatic system that's extremely accurate, multiple algorithms checking one another. So it improves the accuracy, cuts down on all that paperwork that would have had to have been done, because it's all electronic now. Really all that you're printing out is just the IFTA data from Geotab, and then you don't have to have administrators who are tallying it, calculating it. It's just Geotab does all the work, and then you're also minimizing the risk of violations. So if there's missing information, there's errors, you get audited. We're minimizing those risks by using telematics.
Eric, I just have a quick question for you. You're talking about the IFTA management of reports. Now, we don't actually provide the actual IFTA reporting. What we do is provide the mileage for the reporting. Is that correct? Just to be specific here, I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Sure, that's correct. It's not, the IFTA report itself doesn't generate in a format that you could just automatically file. You would still have to fill in the fuel usage information, and yeah, we'll go over that further later, but that is a good question.
So just to further touch on how the GPS data compares to paper routing and mileage, if someone's calculating distance from point to point on a paper map, sometimes the map provider might have a distance between, say, New York and Washington, D.C., and then that's probably relatively accurate. If you have to go through a bunch of waypoints, there would be decreasing accuracy. So the rule of thumb is paper could be anywhere from 0 to, say a 20% error, depending on how the methodology was used. Another way you could calculate distance for the purposes of IFTA would be to use dispatch routes, where you might have a short route, but the driver actually goes via their favorite lunch place, and you don't know for sure that the driver followed the route that dispatch gave them. So again, this is somewhat accurate, but anywhere from 5 to 10% disparity between the actual route that the driver followed. So it's an okay method, but you're able to get increased accuracy by using the next level, which is GPS data. So GPS data, obviously, you get from the satellite and triangulation. Now, the manner in which the GPS data itself is used could affect the accuracy. If a provider only does time-based sampling, it will basically straighten out the route that the driver is taking and will make the route seem shorter than it actually was, because it avoids curves, as it's only taking straight line distance between data points at a time sequence. However, much more accurate than paper and dispatch routes generally, and your error might be kind of in the range of 2% from actual. What Geotab does, and what is generally accepted as the most accurate method to calculate the distance, is to use GPS data that is normalized to the odometer. For one, what Geotab does with the GPS data is a patented curve logging, where the system is event-based rather than time-based, and will log a point at a transition point, a change, so that you get not an overwhelming amount of data, but you do get precision based on the what the vehicle is doing. And then also we're reconciling that back to the odometer, particularly at the beginning and end of a state, for example, so you're able to get a link back to the odometer that the driver is able to see to keep that consistency between the GPS data, which is sometimes difficult to see, and the odometer, which is obviously visible to everyone.
Okay, so just to expand on that and our method within the MyGeotab IFTA report. So we use, as James mentioned, a combination, a very sophisticated combination of both readings from the vehicle's computer with highly accurate GPS to calculate the distance traveled per state. So I think my understanding, most IFTA automatic IFTA reports out there use just GPS, but we have found it to be the most accurate to use both GPS and odometer. So just to go over a bit about our GPS system, the GPS data itself is very accurate and goes through quite a few internal checks in the device itself, actually, before it's even logged. So there's an internal algorithm, a patented algorithm, which validates all of the logs. So we have that first check, and then furthermore, most vehicles nowadays also log engine-based road speed, so we also check the speed against that piece of engine data if we do not get a perfectly valid latch at the time. So we can still actually log a valid speed, and if that's the case. Just a bit of technical information here. Each bit of latitude and longitude for the logs has a precision of 0.0000256 of a degree. That's just the way you kind of state GPS accuracy in the field, but what that translates to is about 2 to 5 to 3 meters of accuracy. So you're getting individual trees, not huge trees, because this is contrasted with streets, which is the next level of accuracy, or the next lower level of accuracy. So it's a very high degree of accuracy. If you wanted to there's actually a lot more information about the GPS accuracy. I just put some of the points here. So if you want more information, just follow the link there and see our firmware release notes, where you'll find quite a bit more information.
Okay, Eric, just one quick note on that. You've got an estimate, or an exact, I guess, on a latitude, longitude with the precision of. That's basically 2.5 to 3 meters. So that's true not just for IFTA reporting. That's true for everything. Is that correct? Our GPS data is correct to about 10 feet or 3 meters.
That is correct. Yeah, it's everything. And then when it comes to odometer data, we've chosen to include this because, as you know, odometer data is one of the most critical pieces of information for a fleet manager, for the fleet in general. It's a reference point that was used before telematics was introduced. So when an auditor comes in and they see your report just based off a GPS, the one thing they're going to wonder is how it relates to odometer in the vehicle. They're going to wonder how it's related to this bit of information that we see that's incrementing and getting logged as you've crossed the state border. So we take account for that. We pull it from the vehicle computer and we incorporate that into the IFTA calculation. Pretty much all odometers work by counting wheel rotations. It just depends on what in the vehicle they're actually counting as rotating, which will differ. Like nowadays it's all electronic odometers using some kind of magnet on the drive shaft, but that's irrelevant really. We just pull it from the computer and it's very accurate. So we always consider it very important to get odometer on all vehicles. So we do maintain a list in the firmware release notes, and it's always getting updated. And it might not be fully up to date at the moment, but if you follow that link there, you can also find out which vehicles we do support odometer data at the moment. But I mean, if there is a vehicle that it's not supported on, please bring it to our attention, because we want to make sure we're getting odometer data from all vehicles.
So if I was to ask, you're saying we get them on most, but we do have a list. Would it be sufficient to say in anything 2008 and newer we are getting odometer on standard vehicles, and if we're not, it's worth letting us know that we can get that updated so that we can get it?
That's a great way to put it. That makes perfect sense. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Okay, now just to go over some things to be aware of about odometer and GPS, because nothing's perfect. No system is perfect. There are inherent discrepancies in these technical systems. So one thing to be aware of with odometer is odometer discrepancies can be introduced because it's based on the vehicle's computer's understanding of the tire circumference, which can change over time. You can replace the tires for snow tires that get worn out, maybe they're not full, perhaps the vehicle load is much higher than expected. All of these things can contribute, and even a slight amount can actually lead to like up to a 5% or 10% error in the odometer. So actually knowing this, many vehicle manufacturers actually build in to their speedometers this kind of understanding. So many European vehicles actually, like on Volkswagens, you might find that the speedometer actually reports high. They don't want to be liable for if you're caught speeding and it's underreporting, but the cop pulled you over for going 10 over. So they actually build this in knowing that these discrepancies can arrive over time. For example, in a fleet, if the tires are getting changed or a different kind of tires being put on, it'd be good to check on how the odometer values are reporting at the time. It's something that you can do within my GeoTab, and if we have time, perhaps I can show you how to look at that odometer data. But that's just some very good thing to be aware of. So continuing along with that, some things to note about GPS discrepancies. So very uncommon, but they can occur. I mean, I've seen last year even, there was a particular thing near the end of the year where this great tool, you could see the visible satellites. So it's just like a particular place on the planet. Because of the way the satellites were arranged, they weren't getting GPS, like vehicles on like the eastern seaboard weren't getting good GPS for like 15 minutes in the day. So that kind of demonstrates how, yeah, it can differ over time, but that is a very uncommon issue. Something that could be seen as well is things like dense clouds, heavy precipitation. These can interfere with the signal, but rarely do so. Another thing is you might see within cities themselves, the tall buildings can deflect the signal. So external obstructions can get in the way of the signal, like mountains, valleys, tall buildings, etc. There is a concern among people that jamming can be an issue, but honestly, it's actually quite difficult to jam the device. So it's not as common as it was in the early days of GPS. It was actually more of an issue back then, but these days it's actually quite difficult. But certain things within the vehicle that aren't intentional, like metallic tinting, can get in the way, or another kind of satellite system that perhaps uses the same frequency. These things can get in the way. Anyway, for more information about the GPS system and how it works and just kind of a general overview, there's a great blog which I linked to there that you can read at your leisure. Okay, so how do we generate the report from within MyGeotab? It can be scheduled to run as well, but for a lot of people, because at the moment we don't have a 3-month or quarterly option for sending the report because it's such a large report, an intensive report, most people are going to be running it through the user interface in MyGeotab. So step 1, log into MyGeotab. Secondly, you want to go on the left side to the activity section, and then under that click IFTA report. Now in a second I will go through all this myself with you. I'll show it. I'll log in and show you what to do. And then thirdly, you want to click options and select what you want to run for. So you want to run for probably last quarter, which is not a standard date period, so you're going to pick custom and then, you know, January 1st to March 31st, 2016, and then the vehicles you want to run it for. Apply changes and then run. I'll take a look at that with you now. So here I just have a demo database. I've already logged in as James, but I'm Eric. And then, so on the left side, like I mentioned, activity, IFTA report, and select the report. I happen to know this vehicle has crossed state boundaries, or in Canada, provincial boundaries, so I'm just going to use that for last month and apply changes. I've actually already run it, so just go to this next tab where it's already completed, and this is just the kind of the UI view of it. You're going to want to export it though, so you can either choose the default version or the advanced version. Now, unlike most reports within MyGeotab, for the IFTA report, the default version actually has more information in it. So this is something James will talk about later. We're actually going to reverse that, make it the advanced one that's got the more information. We're going to even include more information in it. But for now, this is the way it is. So you would then click the Excel icon to export it, and I believe I've already exported it here. So anyway, the first page that's usually saved to is this pivot table, the summary that shows you the time per state and the enter and exit mileage. Some people like to switch it up and not have this default because it's not completely sequential per time. Like, they like to see how it started at the beginning of the month and how it proceeded there. So you can either rearrange this summary to do that, or you can unhide the report sheet and it's actually already done. It's already ordered by time. There's not much in last month's travels for this vehicle, but you can see, like, on April 1st he entered the province of Ontario with this odometer in kilometers and then exited it at this particular time with that odometer value and traveled that much distance in the state, and then it all matches up. So, like, you can see his exit time at 5:58 p.m. matches up with his entrance time in Quebec of 5:58 p.m. And now all these, it would be too complicated. Like, last week we met with the developer just to make sure we were on the same page for how this algorithm works, but it took like an hour just to go through it all. It's very complicated, but this first value comes from the vehicle's computer, and then we basically we divide up the trips to find out where it stopped, and we have these zones in the back end that can see, oh, it stopped in Quebec, and then it narrows it down even more. You got all the counties in Quebec, so we can just be super sure that it was in Quebec and not Ontario.
Okay, Eric, I just have a quick question here. We are talking in kilometers, and I want to make sure that everybody understands it. This is really, because this report was done in kilometers doesn't mean that that's any change that you have to make in miles. It's going to be an automatic. This was done in Ontario. It is an automatic switchover when you go into miles, and you don't have to be concerned about it. That odometer reading is actually accurate. That has 531,000 kilometers on it. Again, flipped over to miles, it would show as miles as what it was calculating. The other thing I wanted to comment on this vehicle, just because I know it personally, is even in this time frame, it did go out of cell coverage, and yet it still picked up all of the time, because I can tell you for sure that this vehicle loses cell coverage about 5 minutes after it enters into Quebec and doesn't pick back up again until whatever day it is or whatever time it is, and it comes back in within that time frame. So we don't lose anything whether we're actually in cell coverage or not. We still have all of that information, which is a question that will come up, so I want to cover it.
Yeah, that's a great, excellent point. Yeah, thank you, Carrie. Okay, so just going back here, and also, so I mentioned that the default report has more data. It's not in the default tabs, but you can unhide the data sheet and you'll find it there. So some customers have requested these bits of information, namely VIN, so they want to know the VIN of the vehicle. They also want the license plate. So you can in the report sheet, you can say, equals data sheet, F1, and then it'll call it over here. That's just an example, and it'll put the license plate here, etc. So it doesn't have to remain hidden. You can make it visible and do whatever you want with it. As well, we've got the latitude and longitude for the state entry and exit points, which is, it's not required on your IFTA return, but auditors, if they want to look at your report, they're going to want that information. They want to know that. So that's why we put that there. Let's just see what else we've got. We've got, as you'll notice here, this column, fuel tax is IFTA state. So we just use this because elsewhere we've got a filter that says, is it an IFTA state? Yes, then show it here. If not, don't show it. So what that means is we actually still report all the distances traveled in non-IFTA states, like the District of Columbia, but here we hide it because you're not going to report that information. But for IRP, however, as I mentioned earlier, you want that distance, you can unhide it, or you can just look over here and see, is DC mentioned? Yes, okay, then let's report that distance for IRP. I think we have another slide after this. It's going over what happens if an IFTA comes knocking. Which information are we going to want to show? So first of all, it is the IFTA report. This has got the first level of data. But after that, I've already run it here, they're going to want to know the trips. James mentioned earlier the procedures manual. It goes over this information that they require. It's not required in the IFTA filing, but you got to store it. So we've got it here. I happened to find a trip here that did cross the state border. Maybe they wanted to look at this one in particular. Maybe they wanted to see, does the actual crossing of the border match up with the IFTA report, and they can see here, oh, it does. They can put their mouse on the screen and see, oh, that time matches up with the report. And if you were to check it yourself, you'll find it is very accurate. So furthermore, they might want to see the granular GPS data. You can either go on the left to activity, view accidents and log data, and then run the report as you would kind of like the IFTA, like pick your vehicle in the daytime range. Although it's going to limit to, I think, 5,000 logs no matter what, so you want to stick to a smaller range. Or they're looking at this trip because they're concerned with it for some reason. They didn't believe maybe the distance traveled, so you can actually click the trip and show accident log data. I'll pull up the log data for that trip. I'm just going to open it in a new window so I don't lose my trip here. And here we go. This is actually pulls right to the time of the border crossing. And you can actually, if you want to go back, you could go back to the map and click. Pops you right back to the map. And so maybe it's not exactly the border crossing there, but it's soon after, I believe. Or before. Or after, yeah, there, after. So I'll just go back there. But anyway, here in the log details report, it gives you all the granular data that they would ask for. Odometer data is logged here. GPS data. If you want to look at more detail, you can open the advanced version of it. I don't think I ran this one yet. Let's see. I think I happened to see earlier. It's got this column here, valid GPS. They might want to know this too. Like, perhaps there was a lot of invalid GPS for the chip. Maybe that's just something this particular auditor is very interested in. Anyway, you can filter for valid GPS, where you can just look at it visually and see, oh, there was a little bit of invalid GPS, so perhaps there was an issue or something like that. But anyway, it's good information for them to have at their fingertips and for you to know where it is, so you don't have to be flustered. It's all there and easily accessible.
Again, I just want to comment on that trip. I know for sure that there's probably some GPS issues, just simply because of the hillies. Yeah. The hills that you go through, there is GPS latch issues that has nothing to do with what we can provide. That has everything to do with the satellites on the GPS that provides. So this trip is a perfect example of all the things that could possibly happen here and how we can pick up the differences and still make it report properly.
Okay. The IFTA filing schedule, if you're currently dealing with IFTA, you're probably well aware, but it's on a quarterly basis. So each quarter starting in January, and they're generally due a month later, April 30th, July 31st. So as Eric indicated, you can't just run them quarterly easily, so probably best practice to run them monthly and start to build them up that way. Maybe don't wait to the end of the quarter just to make sure everything's looking good. Next, I'm going to take you through quickly the filing process, not that Geotab's involved in it, but to show you kind of the information that we provide and then where you currently need to fill in some gaps, some additional pieces, particularly around fuel. And so this is why we don't have a report that satisfies everything. You do need to add in again, the fuel is just really the key component. So the image here is taken from the province of Ontario's IFTA filing report, and it will be similar in each jurisdiction, state by state, but this particular one does have kilometers and liters. It would be miles and gallons, obviously, in the United States. So one piece that you're going to need to calculate is average mileage by fuel type. So really that's just taking for each fuel type in element A, the total distance traveled everywhere, for B, the total amount of fuel everywhere, and then dividing that to get your mileage. And that will tell you kind of how, generally what the fleet is doing, and is used by auditors really to spot any anomalies. They can really see if you're getting exceptionally good or exceptionally bad mileage. That would generally indicate that you have either the amount of fuel or the mileage is incorrect, and it's an easy place to start to look for trouble. To calculate the actual amount owing is a reconciliation on the amount paid versus what is due over the various jurisdictions based on mileage in each state. So with this one, without going into too much detail, you're going to, again, by fuel type, by jurisdiction, put in total mileage, taxable fuel, tax paid by fuel, net that out, put in the tax rate for the jurisdiction, and all of that gives you a row that you will then sum to get a total, and then you will reconcile the difference between what has been paid with what should be paid, and then depending on the timing, interest may be owed if tardy in making your payments. Next up, best practices. So for some who have been working with IFTA and Geotab for a while, may be familiar with a couple of items that we have addressed over the course of time. We wanted to discuss them here specifically. So one piece that is quite important is when a new customer is starting with Geotab, if they're interested in using the odometer function for anything, and in particular IFTA, it is quite important that we make sure that the device setup is correct. There are possible cases where if the connection has an issue, it might report odometer periodically, so it gives the impression that the odometer reading is correct, when in fact it is intermittent and is not giving a consistent reading. So really what it is, it's just making sure that the engine readings, all that information is looking good, running the IFTA report, even if it's not a filing period, but just to see what kind of data you're getting, and you can tell quite quickly if there are any issues with the odometer. Eric alluded to this, where you can use an offset and an odometer factor to help set the odometer reading to the correct value. Now, use this with caution because it can help mask symptoms, but generally, again, due to tire wear or something like that, where the actual odometer does, vary a little bit, you can correct it by using these two features. And this blog link here highlights kind of when and how you might do that in a nice way, so I won't get into too much more detail. Another issue that has happened ages ago, and if you do see it, we do have a way to address it, and I've called this provisioning. So in the manufacturing process ages ago, the GPS was validated, had a latch, so there was a certain point, and generally this was in Florida. Then when the device was sent to the customer, there would be like an initial trip from Florida to wherever the person receiving the device first plugged it in, which would then throw off the IFTA values because there was this one sort of dotted line trip. It just sort of jumped over to the new location. So we are able to accommodate that. So if you do see a first trip that is quite large with a dotted line, we can address this, and it would be this issue has generally been addressed. But if you do see it, we can take care of that. One issue that we've resolved was what I've called small state, where if a trip was less than 20 minutes and just went through the corner of a small state, that state's mileage may not have been picked up, so that item has been identified and addressed. Then one last one just to be aware of, because the IFTA report reconciles to an odometer, if you use different starting points for running the report, you might get slightly different results because it's using possibly a different starting point on the odometer. So don't expect that if you maybe ran 4 weeks to make up a month for IFTA and added them together, that would be exactly the same as running it for a month. The variation will be very slight, but you're not going to get the exact same amount because of this complex methodology and the way that the report is calculated. So try and use consistent start and end dates for reports whenever you're running them.
Okay, good point, James. So consistency in where running the reports is an absolute must, obviously. So if you run it one way one month and then another way another month, you may see some discrepancies there. Now, I have a question on that note because it has come up before, is what happens when that happens, and how much room does IFTA or the government give you on those errors, and how do we correct if necessary?
Yeah, that's a good question. There isn't a hard and fast rule on this much error is acceptable, and if you are, 1 mile over, you're in violation, and one less. There's an understanding that, again, part of the reason we talked about the paper logs and the error there and moving to odometer reconciled, we're now really, really precise, particularly when you compare to 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So we're now getting into fractions of decimals of error through this particular piece. So, in truth, the error here, it's really just visual. The numbers don't look the same. The true error rate is minimal, and it's not really anything to worry about. It is well within the realm of what's acceptable. Next up, a little bit on potential troubleshooting and helping to make sure the IFTA report runs well. Again, another link to a Geotab employee who put together a blog on really running IFTA. So it's a good bit of reading material on some of the best practices, but also particularly here, if you are moving a device between vehicles, how best to go about that, and that can be a source for apparent inconsistencies if you do not properly unplug the device and make the data historical. You will then affect the odometer reading and get some inconsistent results. So just be sure if you are moving devices between vehicles, have a look at this blog and make sure you do it correctly, because it will affect your odometer potentially if you do not do it correctly. So an important thing to consider if you're doing that.
As James mentioned earlier, the procedures manual for IFTA is changing, but there were some points made in it that we thought were quite valuable. One of those things used to be a stipulation that the telematics system should have some kind of exception report that monitored the health of the system. So we do have something for that. I mean, even though it's not going to be required anymore, we still think that is a great thing to have. because we don't want you poring over reports and wondering what could be the issue. So there's this report that's available in the Geotab Marketplace if you follow the link there. That's just called Telematics Device Issue Detection, and it captures quite a number of possible faults that could be thrown, which could indicate an issue with perhaps the vehicle or the installation, but are nevertheless something that should be looked into. So just to highlight some of the things that it goes over whether there's been GPS poor quality recently, or the GPS module has ceased to respond. Another big one would be the device has been unplugged quite a number of times. So if it's like an excessive amount, perhaps it indicates the installation is not secure, so the data is not going to be reliable if it's not installed securely. It's going to be losing connection. It's not going to be getting the GPS latch as it should. It won't maybe, one thing we do actually is if we detect an insecure connection, we actually often, and depending on the make model, will put the device into what we call listen-only mode. So it listens to whatever the vehicle is sending on the from its computer, and we don't ask for anything further. So some vehicles will still give odometer data without us having to ask for it, but some won't. So that's something to be aware of. So along those same lines, we've got excessive engine data logging. These are all things that could place into listen-only mode. Accelerometer disabled, it's not something that really affects IFTA type reporting, but it could highlight an underlying issue with the device. So if the device is logging accelerometer data excessively, it could indicate it's not installed securely. Flash failure there, it's an uncommon thing, but that's kind of something that we can't prevent. It's just the parts of it have failed over time, so the device itself should be replaced. So all good things to be aware of. I would highly recommend that all IFTA fleets that use our IFTA report should make use of this report and check it periodically. Have it as a scheduled report and check it monthly for monitoring the health of your telematics devices.
Just a quick note on that. Based around the accelerometer disabled, the excessive accident level event logging, the excessive engine data logging, all of those things would indicate to me right off the bat that we have an install issue, because that's our number one reason for accelerometers to be turned off is an install issue. So it is something that needs to be monitored. We do need to make sure that our device becomes one with the vehicle, which means it is attached so securely that there is no movement, no swinging under the dash of any kind. If there is, that's where that issue comes in. And there's nothing we can do about that except that install needs to be done correctly. We have new install videos out, just so that everybody knows. They are available for all of our resellers out there, and they are on MyAdmin, and they talk about that specifically, that the devices need to be in one. So that's probably the most important thing as far as the install goes. Make sure that that device is in unison with the vehicle, that it becomes part of it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so wrapping up a little bit here, be aware that there is a fuel management and IFTA section in the Geotab Marketplace. So there's a few reports here that do highlight fuel, and there are marketplace partners that do offer some fully compliant IFTA solutions as well. If that's the route you would like to take, they can export Geotab GPS data into their system and take care of the IFTA full solution for you if that's the way you would like to go. So just highlighting, here's a link to the IFTA Marketplace section, and then also again, you can use the SDK to get this data and leverage that as you could for other applications for IFTA and reporting. And finally, just some items on Geotab's radar, not necessarily for the immediate but more medium-term items. We're always looking to improve fuel reporting. You've seen the fuel beta report in my Geotab, and that's getting better and better over time. So you can hopefully expect to see better fuel over time. We're also looking to increase fuel card integration, so a way to get that fuel information into our system, and third-party integrations on the marketplace as well. One piece we talked about specifically for the IFTA report is to put trips embedded in the IFTA summary report. So if you recall, the IFTA report that Eric showed us has just mileage within a state, you would be able to expand that and see the various trips within that state to help if an auditor does have questions. Additionally, an API for IFTA, so this heavy logic that's run to calculate the information, to make that available in the API, not just giving raw GPS data and then leaving it to the third party to calculate it. And then finally, we're proposing to have an IFTA survey to gauge reseller feedback and direction to help us improve that as we go forward.
All right, excellent. Thank you both, James and Eric. That has been very good at understanding what our IFTA does, did do, and will do in the future. And really, it gives us some underlying information as to where it comes from and how you can use it. I just want to say thank you so much for being here with us today, and we will talk to you next week.